The darkness enveloped the gloomy forest as a group of friends set out on a hike. Their goal was to make their way through the forest and reach a small town on the other side. Everything went smoothly until they realized they had gotten lost and had lost their direction. As night began to fall, they decided to set up camp for the night. They started a fire and settled in for the night. Soon after they had gone to sleep, they began to hear strange sounds that they hadn't noticed before. They heard the sound of the wind and leaves rustling, the rustling of trees, and the cries of animals in the distance. But amidst these sounds were other sounds that couldn't be explained. Someone whispered that they weren't alone in the forest, but the others decided it was just their imagination. But when they woke up the next morning, they realized that something truly frightening had happened. One of their friends, who was supposed to stand guard all night, was missing. They started looking for him, but couldn't find him anywhere. All they found were footsteps and bloodstains on the leaves. They knew that something had happened to him and began to fear for their lives. They tried to find a way out of the forest, but continued to get lost and eventually returned to where their camp was. They decided that they needed to fortify their shelter to protect themselves from whatever was hiding in the forest. They found an old cave hidden behind the trees and decided to use it as a refuge. When they were safe, one of the friends noticed something strange in the behavior of the other. He seemed nervous and withdrawn, and his eyes spoke of something greater than just fear. When he asked him about it, the other just smiled and walked away. Since then, several years had passed, but he never forgot that incident. He decided to return to the forest where they lost their friend and began to explore it. However, after some searching, he discovered that the forest had been destroyed, and in its place, a canned food factory was built. He began to question the workers at the factory, but no one could remember the forest that had been there before. The workers told him that there was an old hospital nearby where very strange things happened. He began to think that it was all an illusion and that they had never been in the forest. But one day, he received a letter from his friend who disappeared in the forest. The letter read,
"You were closer than you think, but you didn't see what I saw. The forest was just the beginning of my journey, and now I'm in a place you'll never find. But if you're so persistent, you can start your own journey to find the truth. But be careful, not everything is what it seems."
He couldn't believe his eyes. It was a letter from his friend who disappeared many years ago. He didn't know what to do, but he decided that he had to learn more about the place where his friend was. He started exploring the factory but found nothing. Soon, he turned to old maps and geodetic data and discovered that there used to be an old cemetery where the forest was. He decided he should visit this place and headed there. When he arrived at the cemetery, he found it had been abandoned for many years. However, he managed to find a grave with his friend's name engraved on it. He decided this could be the start of his search. He started digging around the grave and soon discovered an old, abandoned tunnel. He decided he should explore it and headed inside. He walked several kilometers through the tunnel until he finally reached the end. There he discovered a secret laboratory where terrible experiments were being conducted on people. He saw his friend, who was bound and handcuffed. His friend was alive but badly injured. He learned that his friend had been kidnapped by a mad doctor who had been conducting dangerous experiments on him. He realized he needed to save his friend, but he was unable to defeat the mad doctor on his own. He decided to call the police and return with them to save his friend. But when they returned, They found that the laboratory had been destroyed and everyone inside had died. His friend was missing, and he could not explain what had happened. Since then, he has conducted his own investigations. Upon returning home, he began searching for answers to the questions that had been haunting him for all these years. He studied the history of the cemetery area and remembered what the workers had said about the former hospital, and found out that it had been built in the early 20th century and used to treat people with mental illnesses. But in the 1972, it was closed down due to a scandal involving experiments conducted by the head doctor there. He continued his search and finally, with the help of documents he found in the library, discovered the name of that Dr. Richard Holloway. He learned that Holloway had been fired from the hospital, but his whereabouts were unknown. He began searching for Dr. Holloway and finally found his address in a remote town. He arrived there, but learned that the doctor had died several years ago. However, among his belongings, he found a letter with a mysterious location, an old cassette player, and a tape recording. He played the recording and heard Dr. Holloway's voice talking about his experiments on people. He spoke of how he studied the mind and tried to unlock the secrets of the human psyche. But then the doctor's voice became increasingly interrupted, and at the end of the recording, he simply wept and screamed.
They found me. They found me.
After hearing this recording, he began to understand that his friends were not the only victims of Dr. Holloway. He realized that his friend who disappeared in the forest was one of those who had been experimented on by Dr. Holloway. He realized that the forest where they lost their friend was not just a forest, but a trap created by Dr. Holloway for his victims. He understood that they were all part of his big experiment. He decided to continue his search mission and headed towards the mysterious location indicated in the letter. Along the way, he encountered various obstacles: steep slopes, deep pits, sharp rocks, and dense vegetation. But his thirst for truth was stronger than any physical discomfort, and he continued to move forward. As he advanced deeper into the jungle, his condition deteriorated. He began to suffer from dehydration and hunger, and his mind became muddled from lack of sleep and lack of clarity in his thoughts. But he continued to move forward, persistently crossing stones and bushes. Finally, after many days of travel, he reached the place indicated in the letter. He was in the depths of a cave, which was lit by a dim light bulb. In the center of the cave stood an old table, on which were spread out notes, drawings, and devices related to medicine and biology. His friend was sitting behind the table, looking at him with a smile.
"I'm glad you came,"
said his friend.
"I knew you would find me if you really wanted to. But you must understand that this is something greater than just the search for truth. This is great science, great knowledge that our race has been trying to find for many centuries. And I have found it."
He pointed to a strange object on the table. It was a small sphere covered in various symbols and drawings.
"This is my discovery,"
the friend continued.
"I found it at the bottom of the ocean where it had rested for many years. It is ancient knowledge that was lost for centuries. But I found it, and now I am ready to share my knowledge with you."
But as soon as the friend picked up the sphere, everything around them began to shake and the walls of the cave started to crumble. Alex opened his eyes and found himself lying in an unknown room. The walls were covered in dirt and mold, and the smell was terrible. He tried to get up but found that his hands and feet were tied with rope. He began to panic and scream, but no one responded to his cries. Suddenly, the door opened and a man in a white coat walked in. He smiled and said,
"Welcome, my friend. How are you feeling?"
What is this place? Who are you?
Alex screamed.
"This is my laboratory, and I am Dr. Black. I conduct experiments on people, as you have already learned. You are my latest research subject, and I hope you can bring me a lot of useful information."
Alex was horrified. He realized that he was in the hands of a mad doctor, and that his life was in danger. But he wasn't going to give up without a fight. He began to struggle and wriggle, trying to free himself from the ropes.
Oh, don't do that, my friend. You're only making the situation worse,"
said Dr. Black, smiling and pulling a syringe out of his pocket. He slowly approached Alex and injected him with an unknown substance. The main character began to feel drowsy, and soon he lost consciousness. When he woke up, he was in a dark room full of various devices and machines. Strange symbols and drawings were painted on the walls that he couldn't understand. In the distance, he heard voices that seemed familiar to him. He started moving towards the sounds and soon discovered that he was in a large hall where some strange ritual was taking place. People dressed in black stood around the altar and whispered something in an unfamiliar language. He couldn't understand what was happening and began to panic. Suddenly, one of the people noticed him and started approaching. Alex desperately tried to free himself, but the ropes were too strong. The man approached and started speaking in an unfamiliar language, but then he fell silent and stared at Alex in amazement.
Is that you, Alex?
He whispered, examining him closely.
Yes, it's me. Who are you?
Alex asked, not understanding what was going on.
I'm your friend, Jack. We studied together at university. But what are you doing here? And how did you get here?
Alex asked. Alex was shocked. He couldn't understand what was happening and how he ended up here. He started telling about his kidnapping by Dr. Black and the experiments he conducted on him.
Dr. Black. I know about him. He's up to something strange. We need to find a way out of here and report it to someone,
said Jack, inspecting the room. They started looking for a way out of the room, but all the doors were locked. Suddenly, Alex noticed a small crack in the wall and began to widen it with all his might. After a few minutes, the crack became large enough for them to crawl through. They emerged into a corridor, where they noticed several guards, but managed to bypass them and reach the exit of the building. They ran out onto the street and ran without looking back. They only stopped when they were tired and realized that no one was chasing them. They told each other what had happened and decided to go to the police and report everything they had learned. After they told the police about the experiments conducted by Dr. Black, an investigation was launched. The next day, Dr. Black was arrested and all of his experiments were banned. Alex and Jack received thanks from the police and were invited to a press conference, where they told their story to all the journalists. Their story became the main news in all the news outlets. After this incident, Alex decided to change his life and began to engage in charity work. He started financing and organizing various charitable events, helping those who needed help. He decided to use his experience and knowledge to make the world a better place and to save other people who could have ended up in the same situation he was in. And so he lived a long and happy life, helping others and doing good deeds.